So can we know the magic recipe behind your storytelling?
The heart of a story is the conflict. I think Gobar is at the heart of a great story. There has to be Gobar. There has to be Gobar. Your critics are the people telling you that they love you.
Some of these best villains that you would like to rate.
What looks like the villain actually becomes the hero of the story.
कहना क्या चाहते हो?
There's a great story of Dravid the villain. Dravid's view was that, you know what, we're not here to let individuals get personal glory. It was Winston Churchill went to a school and the kids asked him for the best advice he's got. And he says 7 words: never give up, never give up.
How would you comment on this? Storytelling as a life skill.
Storytellers are not necessarily the first people to have found something. They are just the people who have the ability to say it in a manner which the whole world sits up and says, wow, never heard of this before. No Gobar, no story.
This is amazing. This is going to be a blockbuster. So, Prakash, as a storyteller, and that is what you do so often, I'm assuming there must be a hunt going in your mind, spotting stories, finding characters, finding plots. But I'm very curious, and I'm sure so much would be our viewers would also be. What are those unexpected places that you find stories?
So you're right. Stories are, I think, all around us. You know, you just need to look. And as they often say, you'll find what you go looking for. And I guess in some senses, I'm a sucker for stories now. And I'm constantly looking for it. And I sometimes think, Nishant, I have, like these two lenses in my head. Yeah. One of them is looking at something and saying, so that's what's happening. And the other one is looking at it and saying, so what does this tell us about the world? What's the message here? What's the lesson you can learn from this? So I think in some senses, in stuff that I see around me, somebody says something, all of us are seeing it, all of us are listening to it. But maybe my mind starts to work to say, what can you learn from here? And talking of, unusual places, you'll find them everywhere. But I'm trying to remember something that happened not so long ago. I was doing a workshop at a hotel in Mumbai, as it happens, at the JW Marriott. And the venue for our workshop, it was a 2-day workshop, and we were on the 10th floor of the Marriott. So, every morning you come in, get into the lift, go to the 10th floor, attend, and then our lunch break would be at the cafe on the ground floor. So lunchtime, everybody troops back down, grabs lunch, goes back up. On day 2, when we were coming back after lunch, we got into the lift, went to the 10th floor, and as we came out, somebody else, a participant, said, did you notice how cool the lift is? Yeah, it's such a deadly lift because, it goes to the 10th floor in a jiffy. And not just that, you would imagine if it's such a high-speed lift, it'll have that thrust of propulsion. You'll feel like a jerk. Nothing, smooth as butter. And it gets you there. And then somebody said, what else would you expect from JW Marriott? They do such a good job of everything they do. And we all agreed. And then we got into the conference room, and someone had this sudden freaky idea to kind of draw the curtain to look outside. And when they did that, we found that we were on the first floor.
Okay.
We were on the first floor. And suddenly it now fell into place that, why were we going from ground to 10 so quickly? But here's the deal. Marriott chose had the freedom to choose. Why should it's my hotel?
Yeah.
I can decide what I call the lift. So, first floor became 10th floor.
Okay.
And now it's relatable when you consider that this is the airport this is the hotel next to the airport. So you can't have very tall hotel buildings anyways.
Yes.
So it's a 5-6-storied building, which is therefore floor number 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. But think about it. How our beliefs, our perceptions shape our reality. Right? We thought, if it's the 10th floor, look at how good the lift is. Look at how fast it is. Look at how good the Marriott guys are.
Yeah.
Right? And truth is, you can just relabel something and your world can change. And if I go back in time into my early career, there was a time when, people were desperate for designations. And if you're a young manager, to become general manager was this dream.
Oh, yes.
And then you wanted to become vice president, and that would happen. There'd be 4 people in the company who were vice presidents, and they were all close to retirement and either had walking sticks or, that was our...
Yeah.
And suddenly people said, why should I have to wait that long? Yeah. And some bright HR guy decided to do the Marriott thing. and you suddenly have vice president, an associate vice president, senior vice president, executive vice president, everybody getting promoted all the time. Nobody got hurt because, the mother-in-law is very happy that my prospective son-in-law is vice president.
Yes.
So what?
Yeah.
If he was actually looking after sending telex messages and he was vice president for communication, which basically meant sending faxes and telexes. Yeah. So I think it was a great lesson for me to say how, by just changing how people see things, you can change the way they experience reality.
So interesting. What I noticed, Prakash, the way you're explaining this whole elevator going up and you noticing, I found you helping me imagining the situation in a very real-time scenario. I heard you speaking about elevator, 3 of you, 10th floor. You spoke about time of the day, pre-conference. You helped me to kind of visualize the mind space and time. I kind of sense you have certain ways of telling a story. There are certain techniques. So can we know the recipe behind, the magic recipe behind your storytelling, Prakash? How does it make such a special impact on all of us?
So it will no longer be magic recipe, it's just a recipe. Because a good magician will never tell you the trick. So
yes.
Well, it's not a trick. I think it's a very simple thing, and I'd love to share what works for me.
Yeah.
So this is by no way trying to suggest it's the only way to tell a story, but I'll try and share what works for me. And I think the first rule I have is that, remember that when you're trying to think of a story, it has 3 parts. There's a setup, there's conflict, and then there's resolution. Setup, conflict, resolution. What happens very often when we try and tell a story is we are focused on setting it up to say, kya ho raha tha, this is what is happening, here's what's going on. And then we are trying to very quick to get to the resolution. So what happened in the end? Fast forward, I want to know what happened in the end. The heart of a story is the conflict. There has to be something going wrong. There has to be a turn in the road. There has to be a problem, adversity, challenge, defeat,
There has
failure.
to be a Gobar.
There has to be Gobar. There has to be Gobar.
Yes.
No Gobar, no story.
No story.
That's the first rule to remember. So,
yeah.
I could tell you about the time I was in London and I decided I'll have a haircut. Yeah. So I got up in the morning and I walked to the salon and I had a haircut. Where's the story?
Yeah.
No story.
Yeah.
But if I told you, I was in London and I decided to have a haircut, and as I started walking to the salon, I slipped and I fell into the river Thames. Acha, fir kya hua?
Fir kya hua?
There's a story now. So I think it's extremely important for us to remember when we are trying to tell a story, look for the Gobar, look for the conflict, look for the problem. That is really where your story will stand.
Yeah.
And if you take great stories, The Course of True Love never did run smooth. Romeo and Juliet's great story because it doesn't. There is conflict, there is a problem, there is a challenge. And truly, great stories are built on challenge, built on conflict. So that's the first rule to remember.
Yeah.
So even as leaders, if you're in a business environment, or if you're trying to tell people that, if you're selling a service and you want to tell people about how, my software is the best piece of software there is, it'll solve all your problems, it'll reduce your stock levels, it'll make your inventory management more efficient, it'll save so many $1 million. Everybody says it. Talk about saying how you struggled with it. What's the problem? Talk about a time when you thought it'll work and it didn't work. And then what happened? And suddenly you'll have people listening to what you have to say. So, I love the name that you've got for your show. I think Gobar is at the heart of a great story. Okay, that's the first one to remember.
Yeah.
I think there are some rules I set for myself in saying, how do I tell the story? Okay. Maybe 5 or 6 rules I try and remind myself in no particular order, but let me try and start. I think the first one is to remember your aim. Okay. And when I say remember your aim is AIM. And that's an acronym for remember your audience, remember your intent, and remember your message. I think it's extremely important to, before you start thinking of what's the story that I'm going to tell, what's going to work for me, it's important to remember who's in the audience. Never say something that will upset someone in the audience. You can't have a great story about taking a supplier for a ride when you're at a vendor conference.
Yeah.
So good to remember. Sometimes we are insensitive. We don't realize there could be 5 people in that audience who will feel offended by your story.
Yeah.
Don't say it. So remember who's the audience. Intent. Why am I saying the story? I think be very clear. Am I saying, many of us will tell a story and then say, actually, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I thought it was a funny story. It doesn't work. So you should be very clear. But you should be very clear what's the intent.
Yeah.
And third, What's the message? Important to remember what is the message I want to convey through my story. Because otherwise, you might tell your story and people will draw their own conclusions and they will make completely different inferences from what you might have intended. And therefore, it's important to get that bit right. I think that's the first thing I would do.
Yeah.
The second thing in telling a story, I think, it's a great idea to parachute in. Okay, which really means that don't try and do one of those smooth landings, starting your story with long ago in a place far, far away and try and build too much context.
Yeah.
Try and get straight to the piece where the action is. So parachute in, literally, if this is where your action, the story set here, don't try and land, try and come straight down to the point.
Boom.
So great stories will start with, I still remember the day, 17th of July, 1987.
That's quick. Yeah.
What happened? I still remember I was in the office, the phone rang. What happened? Now, I don't have to say that actually I started my career here 30 years later. Then no, I'm not 30, 29, not interested.
Yeah.
So parachute in, I think works well.
Yeah.
Third, bring in emotional connect. We are all terribly driven by fact and logic. Just bring in emotion. Talk about how did it feel? Fear, scared. I thought I'd lose my job. I was really worried. I was wondering what the bad news might be. So get people to connect emotionally. I think we all think we are all rational animals and we only think through our head and all that. I think get to the heart and you'll have people listening to what you have to say. Fourth rule, Goldilocks. If you remember the Goldilocks story, there's this whole idea about, one soup is too hot, one soup is too cold, but the third one is just right. One bed is too soft, one bed is too hard. The third one is just right.
Yeah.
So I think in your story, try and remember the Goldilocks rule. Don't have so much detail that you bore people, and don't have so little that people wonder, "Ye hua bhi tha kya? Was this even for real?"
Yeah.
So try and get it just right, just the right amount of detail in it. Yeah. A fifth one, good to remember, is to focus your story. Remember, it's a story; it's not an epic. Many of us try and say, this is my only chance to tell a story, so I must build in everything I can, bring in more characters. And by the way, here's the message. Actually, not just this, here's one more message. And I'm not sure if you're convinced, so I'll add a third one. Don't do that. Focus it on one person, one character, one message. I think you'll get it right. And my last, sixth rule on this would be what I call the Lagan principle. If you've seen Lagan, as I'm guessing most people have, one of those movies, classics and all of that. Imagine you go to see Lagan and it starts by saying, we want to tell you the story of how a bunch of village folk got together and played a cricket match against the English team and beat them to avoid paying tax. You wouldn't watch the movie if you know in the beginning that this team has beaten the English team.
Yeah.
So don't reveal the end. Okay. Flashbacks might be a great idea in the movie world, but in storytelling, it's terrific to take people along and they must be wondering, where is this going? Kya bol raha hai yaar ye? Where is he taking me? What's happening? Right? So if I was to tell a story, let's assume for a minute you want a story about collaboration. I won't start by saying, let me tell you a story about collaboration. Doesn't work because now the suspense is gone. You know where it's going to end. That conflict, people are not engaged. They know where it's going. A good way to tell a story is to remember the Lagan principle till the end, till that last ball of what was a long movie, till the last 30 seconds, people don't know whether Bhuvan will hit that six or will he be caught. They don't know.
Yeah.
And that's what makes stories powerful.
Wow. Now that we're talking about Gobar, conflict, and let me say villains from the context of storytelling, some of these best villains that you would like to rate, and why would you rate them?
I think, like I said, great stories are built on Gobar. So in some senses, what looks like the villain actually becomes the hero of the story. Okay, and therefore there's nothing like a bad villain in the context of this kind of story. And I'm trying to think of a couple of examples of how this could come alive. And I'll take maybe one personal and one from the world of sport. So let me take the personal one. I think as a young manager, and now it's pretty common now, but when you were a reasonably, if you were seen as somewhat having potential, you would get one of these 360 feedback reports. Okay. And I still remember the first 360 feedback report that I got. And I thought I was working with a bunch of villains. I mean, here I was, such a nice leader, good guy, trying to do good for my team. And look at the kind of feedback that I got. Some of the things really hurt. But I think that's the best thing that happened to me. To be told by my team, what are the things I can do differently? What are the things I'm doing which I don't realize are not working for me? And so to me, even today, and now, with some of the work that I do with leaders, I often see them look at 360 feedback, and rather than trying to say, wow, this is so powerful, I didn't realize this, I need to change it. And so doing that, they are looking at the report and saying, I know who would have said this. So the focus is on who would have said it rather than on, what did it say? How can I learn from this? How can I get better? Right? And there's almost denial. There's an attempt to discredit the report. Actually, this happened at a time when. So we're now rationalizing why we've got. So I think it's a great example of how this can work for us is to acknowledge that 360 feedback, or, your critics are the people telling you that they love you. And staying with sport, I think Navjot Singh Sidhu has a great story here where he says, when he made his debut as a cricketer, he was Rajan Bala, who was a very respected journalist at Indian Express, sports journalist, wrote a piece on Sidhu called Strokeless Wonder. Because Sidhu had played a knock of some, 200 balls for 18 runs or something like that. And he says, hey, what rubbish is this? And he called it Strokeless Wonder. And Sidhu, if you remember, was born into a fairly affluent family. And so when his father wanted to go out and run in the morning, but what Sidhu would do is not want to run. But he would then bribe his servant to come and sleep in his bed, and he would go and sleep in the servant's room. Or he would tell his servant to get up and go. So the father thinks that Sidhu has gone. Things that would happen. One day, when this Strokeless Wonder story appeared, his father took that newspaper and put it on the bed. And Sidhu saw it and, clearly was shaken. And he said, you know what? I'm going to prove this guy wrong. And suddenly now, early morning, his father didn't have to come to wake up Sidhu. Sidhu was out. Now, instead of paying the servant to lie to his parents, he was paying his servants to come and bowl to him in the nets.
Wow.
And he just went on hitting sixes. He says, I will now become a six hitter. And that one column, which called him a strokeless wonder, spurred Sidhu into becoming a six hitter. And I forget the exact year, but in that World Cup that followed, he hit more sixes for India than anyone else. And suddenly Sidhu became this guy. And Rajan Bala wrote a piece in the Indian Express where he called him the palm tree hitter. Okay.
Wow.
So I think an example of how critics can actually be your best friends. And, staying with cricket, and given that Rahul Dravid is now flavor of the season and all of that, there's a great story of Dravid the villain. So Dravid is captain of the Indian team, and we're playing a test match in Pakistan. And Sachin Tendulkar, darling of India, world's greatest batsman, is on 194. 6 short of a double century in a test match. Still a big thing. When Rahul Dravid declares India's innings. Okay. And of course, the knives are out. And, was Dravid doing this because he didn't want Sachin, after all, not just another batsman competing at some level to score a double century? Of course, Dravid did it because he thought he needed more time for India to win. The game ended the next day by lunchtime. So clearly, there was enough time left. Yeah. Right. So it might have looked like Dravid was a bit of a villain, and such, it didn't help too much that Sachin, this little kid, also must have felt done in by his captain. But I think it was a great message and Dravid's view was that, we're not here to let individuals get personal glory. We are here for the team to win. And as a leader, my job is to do whatever it takes to make sure the team wins. Yeah. And if you now go back into the dressing room stories, there was enough time given. Sachin was told that, get your 100 double century by this time. Okay, we'll give you a couple of extra overs. Okay, so many overs. But Sachin just didn't get it. At which stage, Dravid did what he thought was the right thing. And I think it's such a great story because what might have looked like a villain, the whole world outside which doesn't know the story might think you're a villain, you're doing the wrong thing. But Dravid was pretty clear. He was doing what's right for the country. And Sachin, as he looks back on his career, recognizes that Rahul did just the right thing. And, that's what it's all about. So there's no love lost. There is no animosity, none of those things. And another great example where sometimes what can look like a villain can actually be someone doing the right thing and telling you what you really need to be doing. Yeah.
Wow. I'm just reflecting on our conversation this far, Prakash. Some amazing stories that I'd never heard of, and we just started the podcast.
Yeah.
This is amazing. This is going to be a blockbuster of storytelling sessions, and so much looking forward to. So I'm all the more super charged up to move to the next questions.
I must tell you that I had a friend when I was growing up, a neighbor who was making a movie. Okay. And as they were making the movie, every time we would talk to them, they would say, "अरे ये तो super hit होने वाली है, इसकी music तो इतनी बढ़िया है, ये character क्या है, इनका role, इनको तो Filmfare Award मिलने वाला है." So there was so much hype, and the film was released and it bombed.
Oops.
Okay. So I think and I often, now when I look at a movie, when people talk about a movie on the day before it's released and they all say, इसमें story है, drama है, action है, I think people will love it. And it turns out to be such a dumb movie. And you wonder, what were they thinking? But I think nobody ever makes a movie saying it's going to be a bad movie. Yeah. So maybe it's all right. Yeah.
So staying on, I would like to, if I can take liberty of saying this, is I also believe that I think in this list, we should add storytelling. We should definitely add, is what I firmly believe. What I think is so many of the products, so many of philosophies, so many of leaders, governments, nation, economies, policies, and whatnot, they don't get to see the true potential of what those ideal concepts possibly could do, so much because storytelling has not been done. We've seen so much of backlash happening of otherwise seemingly good policies of a certain government, so much because the right kind of storytelling has not been done to the right stakeholders. How would you comment on this, storytelling as a life skill?
I think this is like, it would sound like, why am I trying to propagate something which I'm clearly a benefit of? But I think it's very true.
But I was surprised you didn't add storytelling in your narrative at that time.
Because they didn't teach that.
They didn't teach that, yeah.
So it's, but I guess no one even today thinks storytelling is something you need to teach. But maybe there's a good reason, We are all storytellers. I think there is nothing like a good storyteller versus a bad storyteller. I think we are all storytellers. It's just that we don't do it enough. And I think part of the blame could be because, we've all become very analytical, logical, show me the data. Stories almost got a bad rep. If you're in a conference room or in a boardroom trying to defend why last month's sales numbers were not met, a line you will probably hear is, "Yaar, kahani mat suna."
Kahani mat suna, correct.
So kahani mat suna. Yeah. Because a story is almost seen as fiction, excuse, not the right thing. Truth is, a story is a very powerful way to get your message across. And I like this. Somebody said this thing about how our brain has two halves. There is the analytical part and there is the anecdotal part.
Yeah.
Okay. And what happens to all of us is this anecdotal part, this, creative imagination, storytelling, all that is kept aside because, we are analytical, logical, show me the numbers, show me the data kind of people. And I think storytelling is powerful, not because it can replace the analytical bit, but because it can complement it. So the suggestion is not to say, stop being analytical, start becoming anecdotal. It's about saying, you know what, don't be a half-brain leader. Be a full-brain leader. So use your analytical skills, but combine them with anecdotal, with storytelling. And suddenly, you will discover that you become a far more effective leader because you've got the facts, you've got the data, but you're now able to communicate it in a manner which registers with people, in a manner which people can relate to, people will remember, people will understand, rather than banging away and saying, "Oh, forget it, let me show you the data."
I personally see the lack of storytelling skills being nurtured enough and people got to a very senior leadership level, needing a professional to come, and that becomes business for us, isn't it? Otherwise, and I have seen this from banking days of mine. When the slide, while it says PowerPoint, but the way the gentleman or the lady would have put in the slide was so much of a Word document onto the slide itself.
Mm.
So you're supposed to make points, but you're showing a Word document.
Yeah.
And in that Word document, there are tables and there are data, which means there is an Excel sheet in the Word document.
There, yeah.
So in a PowerPoint to a PP, to a Word and an Excel sheet, all put together.
Yeah.
And you're failing to stay anchored to that slide and कि कहना क्या चाहते हो. And I've seen these, especially these banking financial slides, so overwhelming and not able to really, वो जो बोलते हैं ना आप कहानी की script और script पे लेके चलो. I've seen those presentations just not doing the job.
Yeah.
Especially for a large audiences when you have wider spectrum of people.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I probably connect that back to the bit that I think leaders, at the heart of a good story is Gobar, is that conflict.
Yeah.
And leaders are not willing to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
You don't want to talk about failure. You don't want to talk about struggle. You don't want to talk about youth. I think leaders put unnecessary pressure on themselves to be know-it-all.
Superman.
Can't make a mistake. I'm Superman or I'm Superwoman.
Yeah.
I know everything. I'm the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
That's a mistake.
Yeah.
But if you can learn to be vulnerable, two things will happen. Vulnerability will build trust.
Yeah.
But vulnerability will also allow you to then start telling stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think you'll become far more effective as a leader. So this is not about storytelling for the sake of storytelling. It's not about storytelling to say, I'll become a more effective communicator. I think if you learn to tell stories, you'll become a better leader.
Yeah.
Because you learn to share vulnerability. You learn to talk about missteps, mistakes, failure. And that will build a culture in that organization where people are not scared to talk about mistakes. People are not hiding mistakes. People are talking about saying, yaar, galti ho gayi na. Seekho, move on.
Yeah.
And I think that can become transformational for a leader, for an organization.
Undoubtedly. And I think the energies, the support that you get across stakeholders when you expose your vulnerability is far more pure, and people are really willing to help rather than just comply to the guidelines being given. And on this, Prakash, if I could ask you, who's your most favorite storyteller and why?
So I guess as a little boy, I didn't read too much fiction. Okay, and that would come as a bit of a surprise perhaps. But I haven't read a single Enid Blyton in my life. I haven't read a Hardy Boys. I haven't read any of these, classic fiction writers. I have not read anything. Okay, that's who I am. And maybe that helps because that's what made me read a lot more non-fiction. I'd love to read a newspaper a lot more. So when everybody would, it's my loss. I'm not trying to justify it, but I haven't read too much. But I didn't read too much Woodhouse. But my favorite writer at that time was Busy Bee, who would be writing this column in Midday. And I would say, wow, what a funny guy this is. Yeah. But that probably, tells you that I could relate to Busy Bee talking about the funny side of traffic in Mumbai far more than what might have been happening in another part of the world, which is what somebody else might have been talking about. Favorite or my favorite storytellers, I think RK Narayan as a kid was one of the few writers that I would read a lot of, and I just loved it. Malgudi Days and Swami and Friends.
Oh, yes.
And, just the whole idea that you could create an MCC, which was not what we thought it was, just Melbourne Cricket Club, but was actually Malgudi Cricket Club. Yes. And the fact that a young kid can play cricket and make have a life out of it, I think I just was fascinated. I was transported to Malgudi. It became the place where I wanted to go, I wanted to be. And the ability to find those small things happening, the grandfather sitting in the veranda watching and saying something with the newspaper open in front of him. I mean, it was vivid for me. And I said, wow, this is what great storytelling can be. I also found that you could read RK Narayan without having to open a dictionary to find a word which you didn't understand.
Yeah.
So simple, relatable, and so charming. For me, that was terrific. Later in life, I guess, when I much later perhaps, but Malcolm Gladwell, I think an outstanding storyteller, and his ability to just pull together facts and make sense out of it, I think is truly remarkable. And I must tell you this, that one of the things I like about him is, random pieces of data will come together and a story will emerge. And like I said, you don't know where it's going. Okay. And I remember one of his early stories has this thing about ice hockey players and why being born in January if you were born in January, February, March, you have a better chance of playing hockey for Canada. Now, what a stupid, how can that be? And I'm not a Linda Goodman kind of person. I don't believe in astrology. So trying to tell me that Jan, Feb, March are better months doesn't make sense. But the whole theory was that in schools in Canada, you have to be born in a particular calendar year for admission into that class. So everybody in class 1 would, let's say, would have been born in 2018. Okay. So all the kids in class 1 are born in 2018. But what happens is the kids who are born Jan, Feb, March, clearly at age 6 are almost a year older than some of the other kids. If you're a year older, you're actually bigger. You're stronger. So you play football better than the others. You play hockey better than the others. And because you play better, you get picked in the team. And because you play better, you get coached. So you get far more opportunities just because you were born in Jan, Feb, March. So I think there is a name in economics for it, which basically says the rich get richer. And that's the principle at work. Because you are 3 months older, it makes a difference to your life. And then he looks at data of people who played ice hockey or hockey for Canada. And the number of people born in Jan, Feb, March is just like a much larger number.
Wow.
Now, the reason I like Malcolm Gladwell, of course, is that now he's come up with this. I think I was blown when I read it. But now people come and tell you, what if people fudge their birth date like they do in our country, perhaps, which doesn't happen in Canada, but that's an argument. Or, this is selective. If you expand the data to cover first-class hockey players, or if you go across the globe, or if you take a larger time span, it doesn't stand. Now, that's really, like somebody said, never spoil a good story with facts.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think this is a great story. And I just love Gladwell for what he does.
Wow. Any particular books of Gladwell that you would like to recommend?
Outliers. Fantastic book. So here's the other thing. There's something he talks about in the book, which is the 10,000 hour rule, which essentially tries to say that you can become world class at anything if you spend 10,000 hours practicing it. Okay. And then it goes on to explain how, chess champions spend 10,000 hours playing chess. It talks about how Bill Gates, as a little kid, had access to a computer. And by the time he was 18, he had 10,000 hours. In an Indian context, Sachin Tendulkar, by the time Sachin was 15, he had 10,000 hours of batting. The story goes that if he was playing a match in Shivaji Park and he was dismissed early, his coach would put him on the scooter and take him to Azad Maidan so that he could bat in another game. So he got dismissed here, but bat. And enough cricketers will tell you that Sachin at 15 had played more cricket than most of them had at 25. Yeah.
Wow.
So 10,000 hour rule works. Now, here's the interesting bit. After the book was out and Malcolm Gladwell was glorified for this great 10,000 hour rule, people said, oh, it's not new. Actually, the research was done by somebody else. Oh, but there is some other evidence to it. But that's my point. Storytellers are not necessarily the first people to have found something. They are just the people who have the ability to say it in a manner which the whole world sits up and says, wow, never heard of this before. And after they say it, there'll be 20 people coming and saying, actually, if you check the records 27 years ago, I wrote a boring, PhD thesis on it. Who cares? Yeah. Who cares? So I think that's what happened there.
Yeah. Interesting. On the stories, and zooming into characters, let's talk about a comeback hero. A comeback hero that you would like to share, that you are most impressed with.
So I guess I'm sure there are lots and lots of stories of comebacks, because comebacks necessarily mean something went wrong, Gobar happened, and then people have come back, which is what great stories are all about. But a story that I kind of loved a lot, and it's I love to share as an example, I must have told my kids about it too, is of this, there's a cricketer called Marwan Attapattu, played for Sri Lanka.
Yes.
An interesting story. So Marwan Attapattu, played first-class cricket in Sri Lanka, scored lots of runs, and they picked him to play for Sri Lanka and makes his test debut. Families come to watch, obviously big day. First innings, 0. Second innings, 0. Damn, all that effort goes wasted. He gets dropped there. 0 and 0 gets dropped. But it doesn't matter. Goes back, plays first class cricket, scores lots of runs. 21 months later, gets picked to play for Sri Lanka again. And this time he does better. No, only just. First innings scores a 0.
Achha.
Second innings scores 1. So now 4 innings, 2 test matches, 1 run.
1 run.
Gets dropped again. Okay. And what does Attappadu do now? It's tempting to imagine, what would you do? You've tried, you've got a chance, you've got a second chance, you've blown it. I'm sure somebody's telling him, यार बैंक में जाके नौकरी कर लो, पैसे बन जाएंगे, शादी हो जाएगी, तुम कहाँ क्रिकेट पे लगे हुए हो, कुछ होने वाला नहीं है. But Attappadu goes back, plays, scores lots more runs, doesn't get picked up because people say he doesn't have the temperament, not a test cricketer. 3 years later, okay, he gets a chance to play, okay, and manages to kind of, get it right. Okay. Finally, let me see. First test match 0-0. Second test match 0-1. Gets a recall 0-0. Fourth time gets to play and manages to score some runs. Okay. And not only scores some runs, manages to stay on, scores 8 test centuries, becomes captain of Sri Lanka.
10 centuries.
8 centuries, captain of Sri Lanka.
Wow.
Okay. And my point here is this here. Comeback heroes are not necessarily defined by how big was the challenge, but about this one little trait they have here, which is this thing about saying, don't give up. Don't give up. Never give up. And Attappadu could have given up, having tried, having got a chance, having not got it right, could have gone and done something else. So I think that's the other trait, which is you don't do it because of something else will happen. You do it because you enjoy doing it. You do it because you think that's what you were meant to do.
Yeah.
And for Attappadu, that meant playing cricket. And I keep thinking for all of us, we give up too soon. Yeah. If we don't become as good as we were meant to be, we all think we could have been captain of Sri Lanka. But we gave up. Yeah. We give up too soon. And it's not that we didn't have the ability. It's because we gave up. So I think truly what comeback heroes will teach you is don't give up. I think it was Winston Churchill who went to a school and the kids asked him for the best advice he's got. And he says 7 words. And what are the 7 words? Never give up. Never, never give up.
Wow.
And I think that's the best piece of advice you can get pretty much across your life. Yeah. Don't give up. And I think things will happen. Maybe Attappadu has something to teach all of us anyways. Yeah.
Well, because that's some story, and especially coming from cricket. How do you identify distraction versus opportunity, especially something taking so long?
Wow. I think that's an interesting one, and I haven't thought of it as how do you separate the two. But I think it's a great point you make that sometimes trying to chase every opportunity can actually become a bit of a distraction. And how do you kind of learn to separate the two?
Yeah.
So maybe in a world where I think there's no dearth of opportunities, there's so much to do. There is, for everything that you look at, there are so many opportunities. I think there's good advice. I once had a chance to meet a very interesting guy, Jack Ma, who is the founder of Alibaba.
Yeah.
And we're trying to do some business with them. And he had this lovely story about how Alibaba got started. And let me try and paraphrase what he said. He said, imagine he says, in his own cute, half Chinese, half English style says, imagine I'm in a garden and there are lots of rabbits in the garden. I just need to catch one rabbit. So what do I do? He says, I start going to catch, I see this big white rabbit, fat white rabbit. I say, let me try and catch that. I start running after it, but the rabbit now knows it's being chased and it starts to go faster and I go faster, but the rabbit's faster. I try and catch it. I don't get it. But just as I don't get it, I see a brown rabbit next to me. And I remind myself that brown is my favorite color. So I say, now let me catch the brown rabbit. So I start running after the brown rabbit, but the brown rabbit now knows it's being chased. So it starts to run faster. And I try and catch it. I try and fall. I don't get it. And the brown rabbit's looking at me saying, haha, fooled you. But just then there's a gray rabbit next to me. And I remember reading in the papers in the morning, gray is the color of the season. So I say, let me catch the gray rabbit now. So I start running after the gray rabbit. And he says, so what happens is at the end of the day, You're tired, you're sweating, you've been busy all day, and your friends ask you, what happened? What were you doing? And you say, oh, I was busy catching rabbits. How many rabbits have you caught?
None.
0. So Jack Ma says the trick in life is to focus on one rabbit. Catch it, put it in your pocket, and then think about the next rabbit. He says, if you find that you're not able to catch a rabbit, don't change your rabbit, change your tactics, but don't change your rabbit. And I think that may be a good way to understand this opportunity versus distraction. What can happen to all of us is every other opportunity looks more attractive because, you can only see the challenge with the one you're working on. All the others are alluring. They're telling you, wow, I'm so cool. I'm so good. Everyone's doing it. Everyone else is going after it. So you feel tempted.
Yeah.
And I think we can all become those people who are busy chasing multiple rabbits and not achieving anything. So a good way to ensure you don't get distracted is to focus on that. Choose that opportunity, focus on it, and then say, now the advice is right. Don't give up.
Yeah.
Stay with it. Change your tactics, but don't change your rabbit. And maybe that will help us to catch a lot more rabbits in our life.
Wow. That's quite an interesting story. And what I'm imagining, the guy is chasing the rabbits. He's getting tired. He could have made the first rabbit go tired so that the catching of that rabbit would have been easier.
What a lovely way to think about it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Now, staying on to stories, a story lesser known that you think should have been known to much bigger part of the world.
I think there are lots of stories, and like we've been saying all along, I think there are lots of stories around us. The real problem is sometimes we go for these big, powerful stories involving celebrities or heroes, and we think those are the only stories we need to hear.
Yeah.
Whereas there are lesser known stories which make fairly powerful points here. And, I'll give you an example. I love the story of a painting called, it's a painting called The Man with the Golden Helmet.
Okay.
It's a painting, Rembrandt, who's, obviously one of the all-time greats when it comes to art and painting. His name is taken in the same breath as, Picasso and Van Gogh and Leonardo da Vinci. So a big boy, Dutch painter. Rembrandt had this amazing painter of The Man with the Golden Helmet, which is, of course, nothing but a man with a golden helmet. It was displayed at the Berlin Museum. And it was like the big attraction in Berlin. So tourists would flock to the museum to go and see really a lot of other things, but really to see that one painting. And if you went out of the museum, you'll see, shops there selling posters and calendars and, coasters and fridge magnets.
Like a Disney World.
Yeah. And all of them with the man with the golden helmet. A bit like Mona Lisa. So suddenly people go to the Louvre and all they want to see is Mona Lisa. And, if you look around everywhere, you'll see replicas and images of Mona Lisa. Ditto for the man with the golden helmet. Now, so the entire Berlin Museum, tourism industry, everybody, it's all about the man with the golden helmet. 1985, something interesting happens. A group of art experts who've been studying these works of art, they come up with a finding, and they say that the man with the golden helmet was not painted by Rembrandt. And they say they've studied it, they've gone into detail, and they feel that it's somebody who might have either been a student of Rembrandt or maybe his friends. But it's not a Rembrandt. It's been done by someone else.
Okay.
Guess what happens next? The painting doesn't change, but the crowds stop.
Disappear.
Nobody comes to the museum anymore. Nobody wants to see the man with the golden helmet. The shops stop selling those fridge magnets. There's no demand for the man with the golden helmet anymore. And as I think about it, I just wonder, what happened? The painting didn't change. If we are all admiring art, the piece of art hadn't changed. It's just our discovery that the person who painted it might have been different from the man we imagined had painted it.
Yeah.
But that's not just about the man with the golden helmet and Rembrandt. I think a version of that plays out in corporate offices around the world. We are all more concerned with who is saying it rather than what is being said. The same message from a young trainee or a young, executive doesn't get the same weightage as if the boss was to say it, right? I think we all need to learn to separate the message from the messenger. It's not easy, but I think we all need to figure out a way by which we ensure that if that was indeed a great painting, it should remain a great painting. Just because we suddenly figured somebody else has done it doesn't change anything. But it also tells us how the world operates, how we are all obsessed with who rather than what. For us, the person behind it, who did it, seems to be such an important overriding factor. But staying with life, I'll tell you another story, which I think, I learned, I heard about it really around COVID, so not so long ago. But it's one of those things I wish I had learned earlier, because it just changed the way I think you might look at the world. And it's something, it's not a classic story, but it's something called Hanlon's razor. It's a mental model. And what it says, Hanlon's razor says, is never attribute to malice that which can be explained by stupidity.
Okay.
Never attribute to malice that which can be explained by stupidity. I think it's a powerful line. It basically says this, we are all very quick to attribute motives. If someone does something wrong, you're quick to say, why did you do it? I know why you did it. You're out to get me. I know you don't like me. Simple example could be, you go out to a store to buy bananas. Okay. You pay for a dozen bananas. You come home and you discover there are only 11. Damn. That fruit seller is a thief. Yeah. In fact, that entire community of shopkeepers,
like that.
They are like that. In fact, should never go to that shopping area. So you will now start driving 5 extra kilometers to go to another place, because that is a cheat. That's a bad guy. Whereas the truth is that after you came off from the store, that man probably discovered, oh, damn, one banana got left behind. Oh, no. I should remember to make up for this some other time. He had no intent to fraud you. He had no intent to cheat you. It just happened. But we, in our wisdom, are very quick to attribute motives. And I think as I look at, these, if you live in an apartment complex and you see the WhatsApp chat in the group, everybody is attributing motives to everybody.
Yeah, it's so toxic at times.
It's so toxic. And it makes us all unhappy.
Yeah.
We start behaving badly with someone else because we imagine that the other person is being bad to us.
Yeah.
Right? So just getting Hanlon's razor right. If someone is doing something which is hurting, it's just say, the guy doesn't know better. It's a mistake. It's ignorance. It's negligence. It's stupidity. It's not malice. I think it can change your happiness quotient in life can go up, I think, if you just remember Hanlon's razor.
Yeah. That's quite a context. I will try using it, especially in the WhatsApp group, because especially around the election this point in time, I saw people actually compromising decades-old friendship.
Yeah.
Just because you were seeing a particular side, and maybe you would have just commented or written or just innocently forwarded something. True. just so casually. Yeah. Interesting. Wow. Coming to your own corporate life, I'm looking at the part of your story before you were a professional storyteller. I'm talking about your stint, especially with Pepsi. And there's something unique about that stint. We all look for the hero in the character. We're looking at being as numero uno, and especially in the world wherein winner takes it all. Your stint has been with an organization which was categorically number 2, a challenger of that brand. How was that stint? If we can hear from you, your experiences about, especially in a number 2 organization in that category.
I don't know what you're talking about, but when we were at Pepsi, we never saw ourselves as number 2. But it was fun days. And easily some of the most memorable days of my corporate life were days spent selling Pepsi. It was the heady days of the cola war. So, the world has changed and moved on in many senses. But in those days, it was the thing. After all, it was the world's best known brand versus an upstart company from New York. It's the company which had like the dominant market share around the world versus a company which was really a challenger in most places. It was red versus blue. It was Pepsi versus, I forget what the other company was called, but But it was one of those, but you know what? It was heady. And to be fair, I can now look back and say, yeah, those guys at Coke, it was a war worth fighting. Two great companies, two great organizations, fabulous teams. But at that moment, all you could think of was, one great team versus someone you were out to finish. That's how it was. I think a few good lessons, and they often say this. There's a story, I don't know, it's probably apocryphal, but they say that in Coke, there's a saying that if there was no Pepsi, we would have had to invent it. Because what kept Coke going was the fact that there was this threat from another company, from a competitor.
Yeah.
And that's what kept them going. But for Pepsi, it was a way of life. And we, people talk about the 4 Ps of marketing, right? Product, price, place, promotion as the classic standard Kotler stuff.
Yeah.
Pepsi taught me that there's a 5th P, which is passion. I think it's important to get passionate about the business you're in. Okay. To me, that was magic. How do you unbottle passion in an organization? How do you get people to get excited about what's happening? And I'll give you an example. There was an unwritten rule in Pepsi that you could drive a car of any color except red.
Acha.
Okay. Now, why? Because, the red is the enemy. Yeah? Why would you do it? Now, this is not as if HR makes a policy document where section 47C, read with clause number 12A, will tell you that, here are the Pantone shade reference of red, which you cannot use. Rubbish. It is just that if you work for Pepsi, you bleed blue. You wouldn't drive a car which is red color. Tell you an interesting story. I remember I got transferred to Calcutta, Kolkata, and 2 little kids come back from school on their first day, and the mom, takes them and says, "So how was your day?" And my son, all of maybe 7 or 8 years, says, "Mom, bad news." So the mom is worried now because clearly, in our country, when you change cities, syllabus changes, the maths that was done in the previous school is different from what you'll do here. Your friends have changed, new friends. Not easy being a kid in a new city, new school. So anyway, she gives him something to eat, takes off his shoes and socks, but she still remembers there's a question waiting to be answered. So she then says, "So tell me, what's the bad news?" He says, "Mom, I'm in red house." That is what passion can do for an organization.
Yeah.
And I think when I now, if I'm in an aircraft and I see some companies and, you see people carrying laptop bags which have their company name on it, or you see somebody wearing a t-shirt with the company name on it, I think it's an underutilized trick. Which is this whole idea of creating a sense of belonging. Why do sports teams wear uniforms? Why do they travel wearing similar clothes? I think the sense of belonging. I am part of something special. I'm not just me, I'm us. I think that's a hugely powerful idea.
Yeah.
And in many ways, I think what made Pepsi number 1 in India at that time, so now you heard it here,
yes,
was the fact that I think there was a bunch of people out there saying, "Come on, I think we need to win. We believe in ourselves. We'll get it right."
Yeah.
And I think it made for some fairly interesting contests and a lot of excitement. But for me, the big lesson, leverage passion, unbottle passion, get people to get excited, get people to feel that they're fighting for something bigger than themselves, that there is a purpose to what we do. And very often, I think getting an enemy or having an enemy or someone that you're up against is a good way to get people excited. Because if there is no enemy,
it's boring.
It's boring. What are you fighting?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So maybe there's a lesson there for all of us. Yeah.
Another kind of a story. And right now it's a season of biopics, right? If I had to ask you one character on whom you think there should be a biopic.
I'm afraid I'll have to give you an answer which might seem right today, but it's something that I would have said to you 10 years ago also. And I'm not just saying this is a biopic I think which should be made. It's a biopic I wish I could have a hand in its making. I think there's a great story waiting to be told. And it's a story of a man called Rahul Dravid. I think he's, to me, a great hero, a great example of what a true sportsman, a true team player is all about.
Yeah.
And I would do anything to make that happen, which is to make a Rahul Dravid biopic.
So while we're hearing a lot of amazing things about Rahul, even today there was headlines of him denying to accept higher bonus. What is it about Rahul that you would bring to the world that you think the world should know?
I think I'm sure it'll be interesting to understand the making of a Rahul Dravid and what actually goes into creating a person like him. And someone who, in an extremely competitive environment, a competitive world, very studious kind of guy, thinker, and yet manages to get a lot of it right. So apart from being a fantastic individual contributor, arguably one of the greatest batsmen India has ever produced.
Yeah.
But to be the selfless team man, and whether it's, keeping wicket when you're not very good at it, but because it gives your team flexibility.
Yeah.
Now, not too many leaders want to do it, because if you keep wicket and you're not, it's not your strength, you could argue that every time you drop a catch, people are baying for your blood and saying you shouldn't be playing for this country.
Yeah.
Right. But he's willing to do that. Why? Because it's good for the team. I remember in some conversation, I remember Rahul saying how, somebody asked him what is it that he's proudest about from his career as a test cricketer for India. And he could have talked about, I was captain of the team that won a test match in England, and, how we not too many people have done it. I'm such a great guy. Or that, the 100 in Adelaide, or that 100 in Calcutta, or some
Long
fantastic, He says, what I'm most proudest of? He says, I'm proudest of the catches I took as a slip fielder. And he is India's, has a record for the highest number of catches by a test cricketer outside of a wicket keeper. And then he explained that, when you're a batsman and you score 100, you're alone celebrating it. But when you take a catch, the entire team is there celebrating. And by taking that catch, you're actually helping that bowler who's been toiling away. You're helping him succeed. And he says, I used to feel terrible if I dropped a catch, because, that guy's bowling ball after ball after ball, waiting to induce that one mistake. And when he gets that one mistake, you go and drop the catch. So he said, for me, taking those catches, helping another player succeed, was for me the high point of my life. And I'm saying, what kind of a brain is this that thinks like this? Where even in a sport which rewards individual brilliance, which rewards individual achievements, milestones, records, here is somebody who's saying, what I like most? Helping the other guy succeed. I think it in so many ways defines what Dravid's all about. And there are lots of lesser known aspects of his life and career, I think, which, he had a phenomenal year as, a phenomenal set of years as a test cricketer, but it was preceded by a stint in county cricket. So he went and played for Kent in county cricket. And he says, it changed my life. Now, how did it change his life? Rahul says, I was always this studious, serious cricketer. If I got out at night, when I'm lying in bed, I would be replaying that shot 15 times. What did I do wrong? Was my elbow wrong? Was my head placement wrong? Did I push it back? What did I not put my foot in line? He says, I was obsessed with my game. I went to play county cricket, and what would happen there? I would be with this bunch of young Englishmen, and after the game, we would all go to a pub, laugh, drink a few beers, have fun, and just forget about the game. And he says, I suddenly learned that every man has a quota of intensity, of focus. I was wasting it at night on the bed, dreaming about that ball, instead of just relaxing. And he says that it suddenly made me a better cricketer, because I learned to switch off. I learned to leave the cricket behind on the field, come out and have fun. And as I started to relax, I started to focus a lot more when I was out there on the field. And suddenly, he had 4 or 5 of his best years in test cricket. And I think it's such a good message for all of us.
For all of us.
There's a good line about Lionel Messi, that out of those 90 minutes on a football field, Messi is standing still for like 83% of the time. Not doing anything. But in the remaining time, he shows the world why he is the world's best footballer. So I think we all need to learn to switch off and not find this need to be busy all the time. Many of us make it a virtue to be busy all the time. I am constantly involved. I'm constantly thinking. I'm constantly switched on. Doesn't help.
It's fashionable also.
It's mistakenly fashionable.
I think it's a great message, and I'm so glad I'm getting this opportunity to know about this. I'm feeling very, very privileged, Prakash, and thank you so much for this. And I believe so is being echoed by the viewers of this podcast. Amazing. Great. Now, coming back to where we work so often, and this is about the motivational speaking, the inspiration that you bring to events. But you think with so much happening around, there's so many of books, so much of podcast, reels, biopics. Is this too much happening in the name of motivation and inspiration?
Is too much happening? I guess as platforms proliferate, as creators proliferate, everybody's got a chance. Earlier, you had to struggle to find a stage or a platform where you could go out and spread your message.
Yeah.
Today, that's easily available. And that might explain, not just in the case of motivational speaking, but if you look at cookery as another example, or fitness or financial wisdom, I think suddenly you have loads of people who are offering it to you. And I think the problem, of course, is that can sometimes too much of a good thing can also become bad.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something we all need to watch out for. But I don't think it should necessarily give that a bad rep. So, the fact is, grandma had told us that an apple a day keeps the doctor away, right? But just because sometimes now suddenly you get a rotten apple doesn't take away the virtues of a good apple. Suddenly the fact that somebody is, trying to sell apples which are artificially coated with wax to make them look more polished, which is dangerous for you. Just learning about it does not necessarily mean that we should all stop eating apples. Okay. Truth is, maybe today more than ever before, you need the apple. And I think in many senses, as I look at the world around us, there's a lot more stress, a lot more loneliness, work-life balance is becoming a challenge. I think people are a lot more concerned about what's going on. And I think the need to have someone who they can speak to or who they can relate to, or to have someone who might actually say something which can just turn on a switch in their heads. I think that need is even greater today, than ever before. And to that extent, I think it's not about how many books are there. It's not about whether there are too many of them, too many speakers. I think the fact is that for each of us, maybe we all need that. We need to hear that one thing which can change our lives.
Yeah. And I think in the internet, what is being seen these days, discovery. And if there's a content, earlier there'd be struggle, because if you're on TV, unless you switched on the TV at that point in time on that channel, you miss it altogether. Thanks to internet, there is content and there'll be a viewer who'll find the content. And other way around also. I think there's a great deal of matching happening. I personally think there will be a lot more of this happening from here on, because the complex world that we are in, there would be a simpler answer to this. So who is dealing with complexity and who has an answer in a flatter, one connected world that we are in is going to be amazing. And I'm sure someone like you will have a greater role to play every next day that you stay into this space. On the books, especially the one, the recent one, how come no one told me that? What would be that one thing that you must be thinking that no one told you?
Yeah, I guess there's lots that I wish I had known earlier in my life. So I've lived my life in many senses in a no regret kind of mode. I've enjoyed every bit, and maybe I'm not saying it only because I'm on the Good Gobar Show, but I've seen all the Gobar as an opportunity to say, learn, get better, and now get back and do something good. That's the way I've seen my life. But I think maybe a couple of things. I'm just thinking that I'm a big believer in this idea that each of us has one unique chance at greatness. We all have something about us that gives us our best chance at greatness. The mistake we make is we compromise for mediocrity because it's assured that one shot at greatness is a long shot. It's not guaranteed. It's probably going to take a long time and it's going to be a hard road. But it will give you your best chance at greatness. But what we settle for is a better road, less traffic, easier route, picturesque, scenic hai. Chalo, wahan chalte hain. Right? And we make that mistake. So I wish this whole idea of ikigai, which is to say, discover what are your unique strengths, what are you uniquely good at, what can make a difference to the world, what do you really enjoy doing, what adds value to the world, and put them all together, and you can discover your reason for being, your ikigai. I came across this, I guess, pretty much later in my life, and in many ways, it influenced my career choices and my decision to do what I do today, I would say is in some sense driven by this discovery of the Ikigai for myself.
Yeah.
I wish if I'd known this earlier, as a little kid, I still remember I wrote an essay in school around something to do with cricket. And I think this was the year when the Wankhede Stadium in Bombay had just opened. So I'm guessing this is 1974. And I called it the Crank a Day Stadium in an essay I wrote. And I called it the Crank a Day Stadium.
That's the title you gave to the essay?
No. It's something about, I can't remember, but I used the phrase
such an interesting
Crank a Day Stadium. And I still remember a year later when I was leaving school, and in those days you had these little autograph books where your friends will all write something. I still remember, I don't know who wrote it, but one of my classmates wrote, hope to see you as a cricketer or a commentator at the Crank-a-Day Stadium. I used to play a bit of cricket, but was never really, good enough to have become a great cricketer. But I wish I'd pursued that commentator dream, But that would have been, paise kahan hai, All India Radio never paid any money. And come on, if you're a kid who's, if you should go and study something, and if you go and do an MBA, then you go and do something. I don't think the idea that I could have become a commentator stayed. But I wish I had probably pursued that or stayed with it and done something about it. And I'm just using that as an example of saying that I'm glad, and maybe it was not meant to be, and maybe I was meant to write and speak and do what I do right now, and I love it.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good message to get early in your life to try and discover your strengths. What are you uniquely good at? And then get to work using those strengths, because that's your chance at greatness. Nishant, I came across something interesting. I believe Jeff Bezos has this thing when he's interviewing people at Amazon. He has a test for himself. And one of the questions he asks himself is, after meeting, along what dimension could this person become a superstar? Okay? And as I thought about it, I said, what a good question to ask him.
Yeah.
Along what dimension could this person become a superstar? What happens to all of us is we look at a role and we look at a person and say, ye fit hota hai, nahi hota hai.
Correct.
Why is this person good for this role? And will this person hit the ground running on day one? That's what we're looking for.
Correct.
We are not asking ourselves a question, what's that one dimension on which this person could become a superstar? When you ask that question, you're looking for what is this person's towering strength? What is this person uniquely good at? And I think it's a powerful question. It's a question we should ask ourselves not only in an interview situation. We should be asking this about our children, about our friends, about people we work with, about the maid in our house, about the driver. Because all of them have dreams. All of them have aspirations. And they are all superbly good at something.
Yeah.
Maybe it's our job to enable them to kind of make tracks on that something.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. And it's unfortunate that we call it human resource. I don't know what could be a better rebranding looking at what you just now shared. And I think I'll leave this as a question for our friends in HR to ponder upon and come back with, isn't it about, and like you interestingly use the word, and when you're narrating about Pepsi, unbottling the best, unbottling the finest in somebody. Great. So now that we've had the privilege for amazing stories, anecdotes, and insights, let's have some rapid fire and the fun side of Prakash Iyer. Are you ready?
I can't say no.
Good. Okay, so here are the one-word questions that we have for you, Prakash. Audio or physical book?
Physical book, any day.
Okay. Do you like the smell of new book?
I find, I just feel that's what a real book is all about. Yeah. And, I enjoy it. And forget audio, even Kindle doesn't work as well for me as...
Yeah.
I will read a bit on Kindle, and if I like it, then I'll actually end up buying the physical book. So I use Kindle for a lot of sampling. But if I like the book, I'll want a physical copy.
Amazing. Kindle guys, you should listen to this insight.
Yeah. Okay. Audio, I like podcasts, but when it comes to books, I tend to prefer the book form, the physical form.
There's a very interesting book, Masters of Scale.
Yeah.
It started as podcast and eventually became a book. The reverse engineering happening. Great. Speaking or writing?
Speaking.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think more instant feedback, more immediate feedback.
Yeah.
The thrill of of connecting and finding people respond to you, to what you're saying, I think is like a drug. Yeah. It's magical.
And I've seen Prakash. There is Prakash before he gets onto the stage, and there is this opening the wings, supercharged and unleashing. But by the time you're on your 25th minute, and I've seen this, from many of the events, you're there, performer, like a performing arts expert. The Prakash happens. So how does this work in your brain and
I love
reflects
it.
on it? Yeah,
I just love it. I feel I'm blessed. I have a chance to kind of make a difference to the people I'm with. And hey, they're giving me their time.
Yeah, and energy.
And no, they're giving me their time. I think I owe it to them to give them everything I have for it. And I just love it. I enjoy it. I think, to be honest, more than anything else, it's truly a feeling that I'm doing something I enjoy doing. And in some way I feel I have something to say. I think I can say something which will make a difference or will help you.
Yeah.
And that combination works brilliantly for me. Yeah.
One book that disappointed you most? And you cannot get away with this question.
So a book that I really look forward to, and I would have thought should be one of the classics and the best books there would ever be, was the biography of Sachin Tendulkar. And when it came out, it was this massive tome.
Yeah.
And it could have easily been the go-to book on greatness, on what does it take to be the world's best, what does it take to be a terrific performer, and the great stories of truly somebody who's a hero for me, Sachin Tendulkar. Yeah. Huge disappointment.
Yeah.
I think there's still a book waiting to be written, and if Sachin or someone else close to him is listening to this podcast, and you're looking for someone who could help write that book, yeah. Our phone lines are open, as they say. Yeah.
Great. Now, so actually what you're saying is something even I resonate, because we went for that documentary, hoping it will be a movie, and that book was too big. And larger world is moving away from long format and these heavy books, and heavy books create a lot of phobia.
Yeah.
So I fully resonate, and I'm very much sure what you're saying today would be heard, and I'm hoping that there'll be a justifying content piece that will come out of this. Great. Okay. Best motivation speaker that you look up to?
So I'm not sure if I'd say motivational speaker, but broadly in this space that I work in, someone I really enjoy listening to is Simon Sinek. I think he's an outstanding guy, and I love the casual style, sleeves folded, sweat, but the way he goes about it and that energy that comes out, and anybody who can. I listen to a lot of podcasts at 1.5x and 2x, but Simon Sinek speaks at 2x normally. So I love that energy.
Yeah. And which particular book of him that you really read the best?
I guess start with Why was a classic in itself, the way he goes about it. I'd probably say more than the books, I love listening to Simon Sinek. I don't think reading Simon Sinek is as much fun as listening to Simon Sinek.
Okay. Any comment on the Infinite Games?
Great idea. But I think like I said, some of these sometimes can be very good ideas which get stretched to become a book.
Yeah.
And without meaning any disrespect, I think, great books, a great speaker and a great idea deserves a great book, will last forever and all of that. But great idea sometimes can get stretched a little bit to become a book. And then you have these publishers telling you that, but it has to be 250 pages. Come on, we haven't hit 60,000 words yet. So, been there, but that's the way I would look at it.
Yeah. I heard avid readers saying this, that book tested patience by repeat context coming into the book for way too long.
Yeah. Also, I think somewhere along the way, after the first 20 pages, you say, okay, I get it.
आगे बताओ.
That can become a challenge.
Got it. Most fascinating character in stories?
Most fascinating character in stories. I think for me, if you remember, there used to be this Noddy as a little, there used to be a Noddy series of little books for children. And Noddy's best friend was a guy called Big Ears. And I loved Big Ears. And for me, in many senses, it became a case of you don't have to be the central character to have a say in what's happening in the story. So Big Ears is not Noddy. Noddy is so the title role is Noddy. Big Ears is the sidekick. But Big Ears is the guy who gets all the wisdom, all the smart answers, does all the cool stuff, which allows Noddy to look good. And I guess as someone with big ears myself, perhaps I saw myself a little bit of that character. And I thought Big Ears was a hero for me for a long time. Yeah,
I'll look for the character. I've not read this book, but I'll ask my son for sure.
Yeah, it's really one of those very kiddie things. Like I said, I didn't read too much fiction after that, but for me, Noddy was a big thing. Yeah.
Awesome. Story or a movie that made you cry?
I cry easily in movies.
Yeah.
So I can get emotional. I can watch Kal Ho Na Ho and feel for what Shah Rukh is going through and some of the lines and the way he might say them and what happens over there. I can even watch a Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, and as that little girl tries to get it right with Shah Rukh, I think I can be. I remember watching movies like Anand and Millie. Again, I thought Anand was a great. Growing up, Anand was one of those movies that Rajesh Khanna doing some fantastic work and I can still cry when I see it. Yeah. So I cry easily.
But any book that you felt crying or you cried?
I guess if I cried with a book, it would be because the book was so bad. Because I don't read much fiction, like I said. So it's not like I would have cried, reading a book where the story makes me cry. So with all the non-fiction that I read, it would have to be a really horrible book. And we've named one already. So maybe it's not fair to...
I felt very intense and on the verge of crying, or possibly I cried, was this Searching for Meaning. The Man's Search for Meaning,
Viktor Frankl. Yeah.
Viktor Frankl. It was a very tough book.
Yeah.
I had to gather courage every time to say, would I read the next page? And you feel so heavy. So heavy.
Good thought.
It was very, very tough.
Good thought. So I guess I've read it as much as just understanding it, and therefore managed to detach myself from it. So never felt the emotions you did.
Yeah.
But it's a good point you make. Yeah. Probably the closest to a book that could make you cry in non-fiction.
Not that I have read many books, so I'm still a startup or a newbie in the book. But
like really a lot of people say, it's not about how many books you've read, but about saying what did it do to you.
Yeah.
So sometimes just reading, fewer books, but letting them impact you, taking something out of it. I think that's really where the magic is.
Yeah.
And not in being able to post on LinkedIn that I've finished X number of books this year. Doesn't really mean much.
Yeah. Okay, so coming back to now Gobar and villains.
Yeah.
The craziest villain, other than Crime Master Gogo.
The craziest villain.
Huh.
I'm not sure if I'd say craziest, but a villain who I remember and admire a lot. Okay. Now, this will tell you that I don't watch too many movies now, but as a kid, I used to watch a lot of Hindi movies. It was my go-to fun activity. There was a movie called Khel Khel Mein. Okay, Rishi Kapoor, lovely music, Neetu Singh. I don't know if you remember the movie, but if you watch movies of that time, it's a murder mystery. Who done it? It's a classic murder mystery. But lots of fun, lots of college kids, great music, fun happening.
Okay.
A romance brewing and a murder in the back.
Achha.
Okay. The villain gets revealed in the end as the murderer is, I don't know if you remember, there was a guy called Iftikhar who used to be the cop in every movie.
Achha.
Iftikhar was like, if you were to say who is the cop in a Hindi movie in those days, if you show Iftikhar, he's a cop. And what happens in Khel Khel Mein is Iftikhar is that inspector who's investigating this murder, and he's actually the murderer.
Oh.
And what is happening is because you see Iftikhar, you are assuming he's the cop.
Forever he'll be
Forever
cop.
he's the cop. And I think to me, that also makes a point about how our perception drives our reality. We look at people and we have decided, before we know the person, we have decided ye acha hai, bura hai, based on the hairstyle or based on what we see of the person.
Yeah.
Which is a mistake we make. And the villains don't always come dressed as villains. Villains don't always come saying, look at me, I'm bad boy. Right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to be Mocambo and Gabbar and all of that. You can be the smooth, polished guy and you actually turn out to be the villain in the piece. Yeah. So to me, that was an interesting one.
So the producer-director leveraged this perception which was built over a period of time. Yeah. Oh, wow. This reminds...
No one would have thought that Iftikhar will be the guy.
Best ending ever.
Best ending ever. Again, I don't watch too many movies. There's a movie I saw in recent times called Andhadhun.
Andhadhun. Oh, yes.
And I loved the way the movie ended. So it's this blind guy who kicks that can on his way out. And I liked it for two reasons. One, of course, the surprise element. But perhaps the bigger message there, which is that, there are no endings. It just sets you up for a new beginning.
Yeah.
And as you watch that thing end there, you can tell, picture abhi baki hai. There is another one coming up after this, And to me, that's a good way to think about it, which is really there are no endings.
Yeah.
There are only new beginnings. Yeah.
Part of the movie, or I would say larger part of the movie was shot in Pune.
Very close to where I live, actually.
Oh, okay.
Nagarpatta.
Nagarpatta, and some part of was in Prabhat Road also.
Okay, there you go. So I can think of, there's a book I loved. It's called Bounce by Matthew Syed. Matthew Syed is a UK table tennis player. And now a sports journalist, and wrote a book called Bounce, which is, I think, an outstanding book. I'm not sure if it's underrated, but it's probably not as celebrated. I sometimes think it could be because it's not American. It's not out of America, and therefore does not get the kind of attention that perhaps an American book might have. But I think Bounce by Matthew Syed is a great book. It's a lot about what makes for greatness, what makes for success, what makes you win. And there's a lot of the stuff that, let's say, Gladwell talks about. So he talks about how they had homes. There's a village or a county in England which produces a lot of table tennis players. So you look at all the great table tennis players out of the UK, they all come from the same county.
Okay.
And turns out that because in that county, there was somebody who decided to put some table tennis tables, and kids started to play. And because kids started to play, they started playing it in school. And because they played in school, they got coaches. Because they got coaches, they started getting better. And he talks about how his backhand was very good because there was a wall very close to the table. And how Gobar can become good. So, the fact that there was a problem, didn't have enough space, there was a constraint, which is a wall very close to the table, but it forces you to be quicker to be able to return the ball.
Correct.
So it has lots of these little things which make for a good story. I must tell you, there was a young kid who lives very close to where I live in Pune, whose dad I happen to know, who wrote a book called Ubaid Nasir. And I read that book and I thought, what a great book it was. It's a fictionalized account of the Bhopal
gas tragedy. Okay.
I had no clue what I was reading when I picked up the book. But Ubaid Nasir is the guy who was either the station master or the deputy station master at Bhopal railway station. And how he saved several lives by ensuring that trains were stopped, and that one big train which came to Bhopal was quickly moved out.
Yeah.
I then saw that Netflix did a series on them,
the Railwaymen,
which of course makes me worry because I don't know who got inspiration from what, and this poor kid doesn't seem to have got credit for that book, for the Netflix series. But you could argue, nobody owns the disaster, everybody can access disaster. But I thought it was a great book. And it tells a story from that station master's perspective. It's apparently his last day at work, and he's being shunted out of his role for some reason, and how he does this great work. And I think brings me back to the point that you don't have to have won a Bharat Ratna or an Arjuna Award or anything to be recognized as a great guy.
Hero.
In their own way, there are ordinary people doing extraordinary things in life. And as a country, I think we need to find a way to recognize and celebrate these ordinary, everyday heroes.
Yeah. Amazing. An award you wish to get for your writing?
I don't think.
But we firmly believe you should get a lot of awards, but the ones that
I'll tell you something.
For.
The first book I wrote was called Habit of Winning. my publisher informed me at some stage that there was a Gujarati edition of the book too, which came up later. But the government of Gujarat at that time bought, I forget, 5,000 copies of this book to be given away to government schools.
Oh, wow.
In Gujarat. And apparently some committee of school administrators shortlisted, I don't know what, 3, 4, 5 books to be put into these schools as good reading for kids there. And Habit of Winning was one of those books. And to me, that was a lovely bit of, a feel-good moment, some recognition. So if you ask me for an award, I'd probably say that would be the day when one of the things a book that I've written becomes mandatory reading for school kids. To say that, what, at that stage of your life, this book can help you to kind of get it right for the rest of your life. That would be a good award to get. Yeah.
I mean, and I won't be surprised if it happens. My son read the initial part of it, and this is in the queue for him. So once he finishes the book that I spoke about, it will be picked up. So what I find about your content, Prakash, the wisdom, the style, the way you summarize things are very timeless and very easy. And you don't need to have a 20 years, 30 years of an experience to read and leverage it. So I'm pretty much confident the content would be going to many more people that it has reached so far. And all the best for that.
Inshallah.
Great. Title that you would like to give to your life?
Title, if there was a book about
a book, story, movie, documentary.
Almost There.
Wow. And why would you say though?
I guess it's a story of a guy who's almost there. So I think as I look at my life, there's a lot that I feel good about, but I also recognize there are lots of things where I came close, perhaps to doing something maybe even bigger, even better. So, and you could always look at your life and worry about saying, oh, I didn't get to the last bit.
Yeah.
Or you could celebrate
where you reached.
all that you did. Yeah. And I feel very good about all the cool little things. I've been blessed to do the things I've done. But I often also, tell myself that almost there is also a good way of saying, there's always more to do.
There's always more to do. That keeps you in a beta state in some sense, right? Awesome.
Beta but never beaten.
Beta but never beaten.
Yeah.
ये ज़्यादा better लग रहा है.
ये भी better हो गया देखो.
Okay. Now let's move towards your tips. And here are these 3 different kind of people whom we believe can immensely gain from what you have to share for them. The first one would be 3 tips for aspiring leaders.
3 tips for aspiring leaders. I think first would be, remember, leadership is not about you, it's about them. So stop focusing on how can I become a better leader? How can I become more successful? How can I achieve more? Just focus on them. What can I do to help them get better? What can I do to help them achieve their goals?
Yeah.
So if you can get your focus shifted from me to them, I think that's a great first starting point. I like what Michelle Obama apparently did. She had when she became first lady and very early into her move into the White House, what she did was she got her team of experts who had come with her from Chicago to Washington. And she got them to meet with all the people who work in the White House, the gardeners, the janitors, the cooks, the waiters, and she said, hey, here's the bunch of people who come with me. Here are the bunch of people who stay here and who will make our next 4 years the fun years at the White House. And after she finished, she told them to spend time meeting each other. And she told her team that I'm not going to judge you on how many of those people know your names. I'm going to judge you on how many of their names do you know. And I like that focus which says, worry about them, not about becoming famous, becoming the kind of person everybody knows. Yeah. So to me, that would be one good piece of advice. Second, I would say, show vulnerability. Don't be scared to show your vulnerability. Vulnerability builds trust. We talked about this earlier, but just get comfortable. You don't have to be Superman or Superwoman. it's okay to make mistakes. And the more a leader gets comfortable with sharing her or his vulnerability, I think you become a better leader. The third one I'd probably say is remain a learner. I think one of the challenges leaders will have is this feeling that I know it all, that I'm an expert, that I'm expected to be an expert. Be a learner. Become a learn it all rather than a know it all. There's a line from, I forget, an author called Eric Hoffer. And I think it's great advice for leaders. And he says, in times of change, learners will inherit the earth, while the learned will find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. So I think that would be my bits of advice for leaders.
Wow. And message for youngsters.
Message for youngsters. I think find a mentor if you're early in your life. Find a mentor. Find someone who you can learn from, who you can help, and a good way to find a mentor is not to look for someone who can help you, but to look for someone who you can help. Okay. You can do things which a lot of our leaders, a lot of the most senior people can't do. Help them to get it right. And they in turn will start taking a greater interest in your career, in your life. And I think finding a mentor will actually help you to get it right. Yeah. A second one would be to strengthen your other foot. And this comes from some research they did amongst footballers in the Champions League. And they found that footballers who are good with both feet are far more in demand. They typically earn 29% more than footballers who are good with one foot.
Okay.
I guess the thinking is, if you're good with the second foot, you can play across the field. You can substitute someone from the other side. You can score more goals because you don't wait to transfer the ball to your stronger foot. Okay. And I think for us, that would mean stop playing to your strengths. Don't start thinking I'm a one-trick pony. This is what I'm good at. That's all I will do. So as young people, push yourself out of your comfort zone. Go into areas you're not good at. You might think you're a terrific sales guy, but you know what? Try and understand what happens in a factory. You might think you're an extremely good person in the factory. Try and understand what happens in finance. You might think you're a terrific finance person. Hey, push yourself into HR. Try and learn what else is happening. And I think that will make us all better leaders.
Yeah.
It'll allow us to respect other functions more. It'll also make you comfortable not being the best. It's okay to not be the best at everything you do. It's okay to be just aware, just know a little bit. That might be the second one. But if I was to try and put it all together, a piece of advice I often give young people is become a PhD. And that really is not just to go and do a doctorate, but to get the P, the H, and the D right. So the P is passion. Get passionate about what you do. Get excited. Take pride. You must be excited about what you do. So get passionate. Be hungry. I think it's important to be hungry for success. I think you can get whatever you want, provided you want it badly. And the problem with a lot of young people today is they don't want it so badly. Mil gaya to theek hai, nahi mila to theek hai. And I think getting hungry is a great way to push yourself to achieving what you truly are capable of achieving. And the third is the D, which is discipline. Underrated today, almost looked down upon. But I think greatness comes out of discipline. And discipline is a skill like everything else. And I think just learning to stick with it, learning to do things even when you don't feel like doing it, I think is a great way. I like this line about an Olympic gymnast who won a gold medal, and she was asked how she did it. And she said, very simple. I practiced whenever I felt like it. And I practiced when I didn't feel like it. I think truly success is about doing things when you don't feel like it and pushing yourself to make that happen.
Wow. So I was trying to make a guess when you said PhD, and I thought P would be patience, looking at the youngsters, and H would be possibly humility. But what you said makes so much more sense, and somewhere you're kind of covering what you spoke about, because discipline would mean patience.
The good thing about stories and frameworks and things like a PhD is this. I might say it's passion, hunger, and discipline, but nothing stops you and anyone else from making their own version of what a PhD should look like. But the trick is, it also makes it memorable. It gives you a hook. So if you're talking to your teams and you want them to get excited, it's good. Don't say, here are 3 things. But if you can fit them into a hook,
Yeah.
I think it becomes far more memorable.
Yeah.
Probably sticks better.
They do. And coming from the finest of storytellers, I fully take it as the as one of the most efficient way to take key messages.
Simple hai. I'm not sure about the rest of it.
And now, for the aspiring authors, tips for aspiring authors.
3 tips for aspiring authors.
Yeah.
Okay, first, write. I think we have too many people who aspire to be authors and do everything, dream about the book, talk about the book launch, the title they have, but they don't write. So I think the key to becoming an author is to write. So make that a discipline. Just write. Put your, as they say, butts on seats, sit and write. That's got to be the first bit of advice. There's a good story told about somebody who asked Somerset Maugham, great author, and said, I'm very curious to understand. Do you wait for inspiration, to get into the mood, to get that inspiration, and then do you write? Or do you write like in a disciplined way, come whatever, I must write? He says, no, I wait for inspiration. But luckily for me, inspiration strikes me every morning at 9 a.m. So I think it's a good way to put that discipline in and write. So that would be my first bit of advice. The second bit would be, I think, write to express what you have to say rather than to impress other people. I think good writing doesn't come out of trying to impress other people. So it's not about telling other people how much you know or about using big words and making things complicated so people will say, oh my goodness, I can't understand it, but you're such a wise person, you can understand all this. Right? So don't fall into that trap. Keep it simple. Make sure you express and make sure people can understand what you're saying rather than get impressed by what you're trying to say. Third bit of advice would be something that Warren Buffett, I think, uses. There's a story told about Warren Buffett. And before I come to the story, what's the bit of advice? I think write for one person. So as you write a book, if you're an aspiring author, get one person who's your potential reader to sit in front of you and imagine now that everything you say in this book is aimed at that one person. And I think that will help you to ensure that there's a tone of voice that is consistent, that you are saying things. You're now conversing with that person. You're almost having a chat with that person. And that's what your book will be. And I think it's a good way to get it right. Rather than try and say, I want to appeal to 1 million people, so I must make sure that my book addresses all these 1 million people that I want. And, it must also take care of this. And what if somebody else is in another situation? Don't go there. Stick with one person and make your book talk to that one person. The story I was talking about is that Warren Buffett, apparently, when he used to write his early versions of his annual letter to the shareholders, he would write his letters to his sister, Dorothy. So his letter would be, Dear Dorothy. And now everything he says in the shareholders letter is he is talking to Dorothy and telling her, Kya hua? What was the year like for Berkshire Hathaway? What did we do? What did we do well? What mistakes did we make? And Dorothy, here's something else that happened. Oh, Dorothy, I must tell you about. That's how he would write that letter. And when he'd finished writing the letter, he would replace Dorothy with shareholder. I think rather than try and think I'm talking to this, I have to appeal to a body of my 250,000 shareholders. No, you're talking to one person. And it's good advice, I think.
Wow. I'll use this. I'll be using this technique.
I'll send you the bill later, but yeah, use it. Tell me if it works. Yeah.
Okay. And the last one from me, and with a lot of greed, because I'm a parent of 2 growing children. And here is my question. So many of our initial stories, these anecdotes, they come from our parents. They try to help us learn life through the stories that they find comfort in or they are very confident about. To parents, if you were to tell a story, what would be that one story?
Interesting. Before I get to the story, I've often, as a parent myself, I've often wondered, and there are different parenting techniques, and what I think is right might be the opposite of what you do, and you might think you're absolutely right in what you do. So I think it's good to get comfortable with the idea that there's no one right way to do it. I also firmly believe that no parent ever sets out to say, I'm going to become the worst parent in the world. Yeah, I'm going to do it wrong and make sure my kids turn out bad. Nobody does it. It just so happens that we end up doing things which may not be right and end up making mistakes. But if there's one story, and it's a story that I think has been influenced the way I might have looked at my own kids. It's a story from apparently an experiment in a school in America. It's a middle school, and they wanted to ensure that they get great results in the state board exams. So the principal of the school came up with an idea. And what he did was they picked out the top 30 kids in that class 9 or class 10. And they said, they picked the top 30 kids and said, we'll create a special section, a special focus group for these 30 kids. They also picked out the top 3 teachers. And they assigned those top 3 teachers to this bunch of 30 kids to say, you know what, let's focus on making these 30 kids superstars. Let's get them to become rank holders. And they called the parents. And the parents were told that your kid is in this select group of 30. And
the Super
30, and we want to make sure that they deliver great results. And through the year, those 30 kids were given extra classes, coaching. The teachers worked harder, we did more work, and the parents also collaborated. So they would ensure that they would also participate. They would bring in stuff. They would not take chutti. They would make sure that vacations were postponed because, I can't attend the wedding because my kid is in this Super 30.
Yeah.
And guess what? End of the year, spectacular results. Those 30 kids outshone pretty much everybody else in the district. They were amongst the rank holders in the state. And everyone was so thrilled with what had happened and delighted that the experiment had worked. And the headmistress or the principal called those 3 teachers in to congratulate them and tell them, thank you, what a great job you've done. And the teachers said, actually, it's not us. Those 30 kids were so smart. And the parents were so supportive. So, it was such a pleasure teaching those 30 kids. And then the principal said, but I just want you to know something. Those 30 kids were not necessarily the best 30 kids in class. We just picked 30 kids at random and we put them into this Super 30 group. And the teachers were obviously blown away and they said, and now, of course, this feeling that after all, the 3 of us were such special teachers. We've done a good job of getting those 30 ordinary kids into becoming the superstars. And the principal said, but I must also add that we didn't necessarily pick the 3 of you because you were the best. We put all the names of the teachers into a hat and pulled 3 random names. And we got these names here.
Okay.
But I think it's a good reminder to all of us that if you expect good will happen. If you expect your kid to become a superstar, good chance the kid will become a superstar. This whole idea of positive expectations, I think, is a powerful one. And one thing I would encourage parents to do with their kids is to not try and tell them, oh, you're useless, or you're always making mistakes, or you are clumsy. Kids believe that their parents are the smartest people in the world. So if you tell a kid you're clumsy, the kid says, you know what? I've always been clumsy. I'm certified clumsy. In fact, my parent told me long ago I'm clumsy. So today they will continue to be clumsy because they're living up to their parents' expectations. So I think it's a good idea to expect good. Tell your kids you're gonna be good. I know you can be more careful. I know doesn't matter this glass broke today, but I know you know how to be careful now. So if you expect good, I think your kids will deliver good stuff. So be positive, try and expect good, expect nice things will happen. And I think we refer to what Jeff Bezos says, which is look for the dimension in which your kid can become a superstar. So if you feel the kid is not good enough, it's because it's like you're measuring a fish by how well can it fly. It will never fly. If you have a fish at home, expect it to swim. And try and say, how well can I swim in the water? That's what you need to do. So the mistake we make is we measure our kids by standards we've got, which are not relevant to that kid. We measure them by yardsticks we thought were good for us. We measure them by our unfulfilled dreams. Mera sapna tha ki main India ke liye cricket khelunga. Now I will make my kid into a cricketer. I mean, the kid doesn't want to be a cricketer. Right? So I think it's a good idea to look for what is the kid good at and expect good things. Tell him you're expecting the kid to be a rock star, and I think they'll deliver.
Amazing. This adds to one more very privileged conversation that I've had with you, Prakash. And I tell you how much I have gained. And I truly believe so many of our viewers of this podcast would be amazed and thankful and stand to gain from the pearls of wisdom that you shared with us today. I thank you on behalf of my entire team. And I thank you. And I actually cannot thank you enough because what you have been adding to what we know of will keep bearing the fruits forever. So for today, I'll just say thank you so much.
It's been such a pleasure, Nishant. Thank you so much for having me here and giving me a chance to perhaps just share some of the lessons that I might have learned in my life. Like I said, I feel truly blessed that I've had a chance to learn from people like you and so many other people I've met, and a chance to give back perhaps and help other people. Maybe there's one little bit that somebody will hear today which will turn on a switch in their heads and make them do things differently. And if that happens, I'll say job done. Yeah? But thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure, as always, talking to you.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.